All right, welcome to the second Harmony session on SED2. Um, Here, I'm going to paste the URL on here again. So I don't remember exactly how much gets into the recordings, but anyway, also don't know if anyone else has joined. But there's the drive link. That goes to here. I have a place to put our ideas in text form and other things. These are UML diagrams like this. So we have like our base task and then base classes and then subclasses based on that.
We could just use Mermaid, like Markdown to write these things, or do you want to draw them?
I don't know. I've not heard of Mermaid before, so same thing. Yeah. Okay. The overview is that many basic elements are pretty much the same. For now I've grouped them into inputs, tasks, and outputs. All three types of things have defined inputs and defined outputs. So you should be able to know for any given task or any given input or any given output exactly what it is that it needs as input and that it can produce as output. Many tasks will have a variety of inputs that it needs. Some tasks will have a variety of outputs also. The sort of standard like a uniform time course task takes all the parameters that you need to set up the time course, like start, end, interval, number of points, whatever. And a model as an input. And then the outputs are the time course itself, which is a dictionary of strings to vectors. And I think I wrote that down somewhere. And then, but the other output of a simulation is that the model itself has the same structure that it had at the beginning of the simulation, but now has a new state. So that combination is generally referred to as the model in this lexicon. So inputs, models, and data, tasks, or just tasks, outputs, reports, plots, and then styles. A range I've defined in general, like you can use that in a variety of things. Like sometimes you need it for repeats, sometimes you need it for like an input of a uniform time course. As we were just talking about for SEDML level 1 version 6, people wanted to define a range with 3 of these 4 attributes: start, end, number of steps, and interval. So if you can either say start and end and number of steps between them, start and end and the interval between them. You can say start, number of steps, and interval and define the end, or you can say end, number of steps, and interval and figure out what the start must have been. You can have a scale that's either linear or log. If you don't define interval or values, and then values if you just want the actual list. So these are different ways of defining a range. So I think the first thing we need to decide as sort of a design point of view is what we want our base task to be. And like Matthias was talking about how, like for a uniform time course, you can derive the shape of its output from these input things. But for a random task that you might not be familiar with, how do you figure out what the shape of the output is? And where does that information live? Does it live in the file itself? Does it live in something you can look up? I guess that's the first question I have for everyone. Yeah.
So where do you look up the shape of the output belonging to a SED task?
Right.
That was the question. So it's associated with that SED task.
Right.
We might have. I think we'll probably have it in our like at the registry, so that we could call that task.
Mhm.
We know what we know the idea of the task already. We put that into the document. So if we're
Mhm.
connected to the standard registry, either remotely or if we have a local copy, some JSON, we could look up that task by its ID, and it would tell us its inputs and outputs.
Right. Okay. So you think we wouldn't need to additionally encode it in the file itself?
I think if we have minimal information required, then the ID is sufficient because we could look it up in the registry.
Yeah.
We could have a more complete uh, description which includes it. I think that's optional. Maybe it's nice to look at. Um,
Yeah.
but the minimal would just be the ID. We could maybe there's even an operation like retrieve it from the registry and put it in just so or check but
Oh,
but
to like be more explicit. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't think it should be a requirement if the information is already there in the registry.
If the
Right.
information's in the registry and you could put it in the document and the document doesn't align with what the registry says, what does that?
That would be a validation error, I
That
presume.
Well, but
Um,
yesterday I think someone mentioned that you could imagine slicing up the outputs in that way, right? I mean, I don't think we
um,
should, but I think if it's defined, if you can get it in one place, you shouldn't duplicate that information
yeah.
because that's just going to lead to errors right in the future.
right. Yeah, the only benefit of including in two places is that you could validate it. But you're right. Often encoding things in two places leads to errors because they can differ from each other, and that's not a great
But
idea.
to validate it, you're already going to have to look up the registry, right? To
Right.
define the
Right.
task.
But
So
if you were a tool, I don't know. I can imagine sort of a bare bones tool that like sends something off to be validated, gets it back, and is like, all right, I'm not going to worry about the registry. I'm just going to assume everything here is correct because it was validated or something. I don't know. This, as I'm saying that out loud, it feels more like an infrastructure issue and shouldn't be part of the spec itself. Like, um, the spec should just be the minimal, like, this is exactly what you need, and there is a definition of what the output looks like, and I don't need
because I
to.
mean this was one of the biggest sets of confusion in SEDML, right? Is defining these shapes
Yeah.
and trying to
Yeah.
do that in the spec. And that's
Or
just been super painful.
So this would completely externalize that pain to uh
Exactly. But it's external but very unambiguous and well defined.
yeah.
Right. Right.
I think
Okay.
one thing which we clearly have to define that we don't pass around this basic data types. So if you scroll up, I just wrote on the tops. So we have these numbers and vectors and so on. So this stuff,
Mhm.
we never pass this stuff around. We basically pass around a data container, we have a wrapper around these things, which contains all this metadata information. So we never pass an integer around or a dictionary. We pass a dictionary in this additional class, which contains all the informations about metadata, annotations, units, dimensions, and so on. So there's a layer on top of that, and it contains just a field. This is the data. But the data is basically wrapped, and we only send like the complete thing on top around. And this will solve a lot of issues because we can get all this information stored in the metadata object, which associates the actual data which the tasks or other things are using.
I assume this is an implementation thing that you're talking about, like not like a text file doesn't have a data container that you're passing around. It just is a text file, right? But the implementation of reading that could say like, if I know what it is, I'm going to put it in a data container and pass it on to the next one. So your library would have this data container. Is that right? Is that a good
Yeah,
interpretation of what you're saying?
for simple things, yes. But for more complex things, no. Like for instance, you can't just load a data matrix or a data table because it lacks the information about the dimensions and the names and the information. So you can't later on access this 2D table anywhere if you don't have the meta information about the dimensions or and so on, and also like about units or whatever. So I assume like for certain things, if you just load a number, okay, probably it's okay, but you would also you always want units or something on that. So I assume there should be some practice that we have to fill it out, and we can't just send a value around. We have to say this value is that and that, and yeah.
Okay, again, send a value around. These are by, generally, I've been doing, assuming that like it's by IDs. It's by the ID of the task with a sub like string that means like a sub very like here, where's my, like as a random example, looking here. So like this is the first thing, like importing from non-SED things, you would need to define things. You would need to say like, this is column based, this has headers. For best practices, I want to put my units in it, right? Right, that's importing a CSV file and like adding all the information that I need to access all the things of it. Like, I mean, if the headers, like if it was false, then you could say column, or like, I don't know, share column names. I'm S1, S2.
I would see that it's basically it would be a data loading task, and it takes as
Right.
input a file string, and it gives you as an output a wrapped matrix of elements which has all the information about the things. So this would be a task. It's not like a loading thing.
Well, it
Yeah.
was what I imagined it as a data input. It is one of the things. So my inputs are things outside of SED, and then the tasks are manipulating things inside of SED.
Yeah, but
And my
this is like everything which generates data, manipulates data,
yeah.
and so on. It's a task, and then so that's a data loading task, and it puts out a data cube that we can then use somewhere else. That's how I see
Okay.
that. So it's
But
it's
when
not
you're importing things off of a file, this is the sort of information you need, right?
exactly. You would need the file, and you have to say, okay, for my importer, also have to specify some of this metadata, column names, and columns, or what, or I can get it from the file format, and like if it's in HDF5 or
HDF5, then it would come with
exactly.
all.
I have certain. I have like I have like a plain text like importer, then I have to provide the metadata. If I have like a nice HDF5 importer with metadata or something like or
Yeah.
NetCDF, which has all the metadata information, then we can populate it automatically. So there would be different importers, but in the end, it all has to provide our data with the actual layer on top, so that can we send it around and the task knows how to slice it and get things out of it.
So in this
So
case, go
Matthias, would
ahead.
you say that it should be under the tasks then instead of like, would you say no inputs like this instead of data, it's data loader and it goes
It would
under
be
the,
it would be a data loader task. The question is, what do you want to use the data for? Like, if you just want
I
to get the
mean, that's,
data in first.
models and data are both loading things, right? I mean, we could call it, and if you don't like models and data, we could call it the model loader.
yeah.
Exactly, there would be a model loader
Data.
task, a model loading
Data.
task, and there would be a data loading task. Okay, and then it puts it into a respective object that we can then
So,
use somewhere else. Yeah.
so my question is, do we need this to be under that line 2 inputs, or do we just have we flattened it out that these are all just tasks? You see how currently
Yeah, I would say this is just a task, and if we run a time course, it takes as input a model, and that's it. And the model can come from a model loader, or we can specify it somewhere or whatever. I think
So it has to come from a model loader. That's what I'm saying. Like anything that's external, I just put those sorts of tasks into the inputs, because then like the inputs section is the only thing you need to know to get something from outside of your world, that's defined in your file, to inside your world.
Okay. So this is just kind of organizational, but really in the end you have a bunch of
Yeah,
tasks and you're just running them.
Like
There's
in the end, yeah, it is a task officially, but yeah. Logan,
exactly.
you had a question.
I just wanted to back up that assertion. Like, yeah, by functional definition, these are loading models, these are loading data. But I don't think moving it separately to the tasks makes sense because it should be implicit. It's not magically the entire data is being encoded in here for an SBML model. It's a model in data. Of course, you're going to have to load it. We just have to ensure that the required fields are set there. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory, unless there really is a case to say that we can't possibly describe this implicitly as loading. Like, there's some other way that you could put in inputs that this is not model loading, not data loading. Like, why do we need to specify this is specifically loading?
you
Yeah.
could put raw data in, type it in.
Yeah, that was the one thing I was thinking also. You could have like literally your just a bunch of numbers in a matrix form or something. I don't know.
Anyways, I think this is fine. So
Okay.
I mean, do we need can you scroll down to tasks?
Yeah. Do you want to go back
So
to the
yeah,
actual?
over here we have the underscore type uniform time course. We might want to mirror that in above, right?
Yeah.
Underscore
So,
type. Yeah.
sorry. Okay. So
But the
yes.
type is implied by the model format or the data format, right? Because you wouldn't want to define a type for every, well, maybe you do, for every
Could
I think
potential
we do want
model.
to define a type for every task.
But if you
I
so if you
mean,
do that, you don't need the format, right?
Yeah,
you don't need the what
because
format?
it's implied by the type. The format's implied
Yeah,
by the type.
because you'd have an SPML model loader type or a SLML or a CSV,
Yeah.
and that would
Here, I
clearly
put
then define what are your required parameters.
Yeah.
somewhere I put models and data in here, I think. Or we could
It
just
does
add.
seem like we want this kind of flexible ability to either define a type and then the inputs and outputs are kind of implied. We could look them up. And then
Right.
yet sometimes we want to give the actual shape of it and the type is implied. Um, I'm wondering, can we have it both ways? Is that
Oh, interesting.
outrageous
Yeah.
or
I mean, so the one thing I was thinking of, that I've been mulling over, is basically everything that's been agreed on by the community, like has an official Casal or has a set of Casal values, has well-defined shapes and how those shapes are defined as inputs and outputs. But then we also maybe we define a new Casal 9999999 and say like Casal 999 is an undefined task. And then we have sort of a one of our task subclasses is undefined task. And then you have to like define all your inputs explicitly and define your output shape explicitly. And then hope that someone knows how to do it, something with it. Does that, and then eventually, like if once it gets accepted, it gets a real Casal ID, then you like change the Casal ID to the new one. You change the name of the task from undefined task to Aron simulator or whatever.
so to be a little concrete here, follow
Yeah.
on Andre's question, can you go back to your input tasks in the
Yeah.
document? Okay, so let's go. Okay, so this data, what's currently called data in the inputs.
Oh, the top one? Yes.
Yep, that one. Okay, so right now it doesn't have a underscore type. This could be like a data loader type, right? A standard data loader.
Sure. Do we need a type? I guess we could have.
Yeah, data. Okay, right. So right now, and I'm trying to be a little bit concrete here with Andre's question.
Yeah.
So if we had this thing and we called it data loader, we could look it up in our registry and it would tell us specifically the format would be given because data loaders, use this format. The parameters might also, I mean, I guess the parameters might be a specific way to configure the data loader.
Yeah, I can imagine this also, instead of just data loader, I could imagine like a CSV loader.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I wanted to say. It's a CSV loader in this case. And then
Yeah,
you
so if
So-
yeah, so then you
Okay,
could
so-
get rid of the format.
Right, then you get rid of format, and it's just a CSV loader, and I think I would also get rid of these like parameters thing and just say these are the things that a CSV loader needs. It
Yeah.
needs to know where it is. It needs to know if it's column based. It needs to know
Does
their
it need to know
headers.
the separator?
What's that?
Is it always going to be a comma separator?
Is what always going to be a concept?
A CSV loader. I mean, do you have a TSV loader then or tab separator?
Oh, sure. Here. So sure. Separator. Right. We would have to decide if we want like for tab separated, is it this or is it a tab? Right.
Should be.
exactly.
I
It
should
could
define
it could
an
just
It
it could have a
right
mix
makes
of it could have a lot of like optional options here to specify it. Basically, what the pandas
Yes.
data frame loader has here, and it has like a few required things, and then it has lots of optional things that you can deal with most of the TSVs.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
going to be specific to the module that we're using here. So we could have a very narrow CSV loader, or we can have like a general purpose loader that maybe someone might want to provide to the community. But anyways, I think you see the kind of like, if we provide the type, then we don't have to provide a lot of the extra specs. But if we want to provide this, anyways, it seems like there's a certain flexibility desired here that doesn't seem all that problematic, but can get misaligned if that type changes anyways, just an interesting point.
Why would that be different for a model as compared to data? Why wouldn't we do the same thing for models?
No, yeah, you could. So sure. I mean, like I wasn't really thinking about that. I was basically thinking of everything being encoded in this, but you could absolutely say type is a SBML loader. And I kind of liking that actually, right? Then you don't have language.
Because then you defer everything to the registry of stuff and
Right. And then if someone comes up with a new, like someone used SEDML that one time to load their leaf data formats, and to be like, all right, sure, just define a new type for your seed loader or something. Jan?
Yeah, so do we want under data? Well, I would like to know what people would think about what type of data you might want to load. And CSV is obviously it's an obvious one, but you can think about any vector data, or n-dimensional raster data. So I think we should define a small set of common or / desired data loader formats. Some of them may be subclasses of others.
Yeah.
CSV, HDF5, raster, vector, SPML, SEDML,
Sure. And then we have like
NeoML, BNGL.
I don't know if we want to call all these loaders or
We want to also aim for the multi-cell simulators. There's some multi-cell simulation.
Sure.
Yeah, but here I would definitely set some priorities. What we would provide as core functional as core implementations. The nice thing about the whole thing is like everybody can provide their own reader easily if we have like the abstraction provided, and if you want a DICOM or whatever, or like some CT scan reader and so on, you can easily implement it. But we should just say, okay, we want a CSV and HDF5 and these three model formats like in the first version, and then the community, if you're interested in other things, you have to implement that and provide it.
Yeah.
And doing it this way, it's exactly the same for tasks, right? So in the same way you provide your own tasks.
Yeah.
So I like this.
Yeah, because then you can start with a core thing, and then every tool can also implement their
Yeah.
own reader for their tool, and so on and so on, and bring it in the common data format. And then if there are enough core classes, like a lot of tools will be interested to bring their things also in this workflows.
PE-tab loader is a really interesting thing that someone just put in there. Like, do you want to load PE-tab into SEDML or into SED here?
I mean, it only sets up the parameter estimation, doesn't it tell you what to do with it? In that case, SED could.
Oh, that could be.
It's the model plus the experimental data setup.
Yeah.
Could bring it in, and then you could say, and now do this or that or something else.
I mean,
Use
PE-tab
their
would
code.
it would output parameters that could feed into downstream simulation processes, right? Not really.
Well, I mean, it would set up the thing so that data parameter estimation could be done with multiple tools, perhaps compared, or just a fit could be compared, something like that.
Interesting.
I mean, we had it, and we sort of had a bit of parameter estimation in SEDML.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's still there. I don't know if anyone have you guys implemented any support for that?
We had a prototype, and Matthias had one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then PE-tab came and gave up on your prototypes.
Yeah. I mean, because the Bayesian stuff was always missing from the SEDML things.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we didn't know what to specify there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The others were like, I don't know what to specify. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what I really don't like that we list the stuff onto under inputs and things like that. It's basically it's implied by the task that is an input. Basically, if a task doesn't take any data input, then it's automatically an input task because it just generates something out. If you look at the diagram, it only has arrows out because it just puts things out. So it has to be an input task, and you don't have to list it specifically in an input section. So
Oh,
yeah.
I agree. Really, this is, you can think of it as a list of functions, and you just the input if the output of one function is the input of another, then you string the whole thing together. You do a topological sort. You have the top level inputs have to be provided, but unless there's like a default or something.
Yeah.
And then the last outputs that come out of the end that haven't been attached have to be outputs. What I think it's simplifying, and I think it's actually true to what we're doing.
Exactly. For instance, for an output, you could never define your list of outputs because there could be someone else and connect something to this output and do some other modification, and then it's not an output anymore. And same with the input. You could just say, I don't want a CSV file. Now I want to connect something which generates CSV, and I connect it on top, and so it's not an input anymore. So it's like something is writing the file, and so it only. If something is input or output, it makes only sense in the context of the graph. So we need first like a list of all tasks or all objects that we have, and then we need some way to connect these pieces. And from that, automatically it follows what is input and output.
Okay. So you're saying we should not worry about trying to separate an input section and a task section.
But
yeah,
I mean, you're talking about a generic workflow, right? Whereas SED is about being able to reproduce a specific instance. So in any given instance, you have a set of inputs and you have a set of outputs, right?
Oh,
I mean, I'm not against the idea of a generic workflow, but
yeah.
that's how you use it in practice versus you're producing something to give someone a recipe to reproduce what you did at a specific point in time.
So it sounds like you're arguing against Matthias and me
No,
here.
it's two different aspects of the same thing. So you have like a general thing where you have everything listed and registered, and this is what you could use in principle. But then if you say like now I could do a concrete instance and I want to serialize it or write it out for someone else to do exactly the same thing, then suddenly there are clear inputs and outputs. Yeah. So
On the other hand, there's a certain arbitrariness here that we're looking at. Like if you want to group it by inputs and tasks and outputs, like Lucian currently has, it should still function, right? We can still go through, look at all the tasks, connect it up. This grouping is maybe nice, but unnecessary. So Andre, I hear, location example 1.xml. I guess that'll become an input. That's like an expected input. So in the OMX file, there better be an example 1.xml, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter if we put it under this top level key input. Anyways, I'm not sure if this matters too much, but
It just sort of model loaders become sort of a type of I can be there. I can imagine like a base class of a model loader with location in it, and then like the specific ones are for particular types of models. And I can also imagine the outputs being slightly different. Like an SPML loader has as potential output, like a dictionary of numbers, which is the current state of that model, right? An ID and its current value. And then in addition to the idea of the structure of it and all the math, which is like a chunk is the model. Yeah.
I'm not sure about the name loader because, like Matthias said, it could be a converter or something, right? That produces that format. It's not just loading.
Well, the loaders would load things from files. I mean, but I could imagine if you wanted to do something else that was a translator.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you could say you could have like SEDML to SEDML translator, right?
Yeah, but I think we still have to make this more abstract. Like for instance, like what we want is basically different ways to get data. Like it would be an URL loader, it would be a file loader, it would be a stream loader. Basically, where can we get like information that we can put into an object? Because in the end, we want perhaps to do streaming and so on. And the output of these, I don't know, a file loader or URL loader or stream loader or whatever, that could be taken by a model loader as an input. And then we would automatically support like all the different sources of getting models from somewhere and connecting them and putting them in there. Because otherwise, yeah, you would have like these are now all file loaders, but if you want to load something from a URL or you need some other task or you need like something which is loading the model and serializes it to a temp file or I don't know. But things should be like as generic as possible, and then there are like tasks which can do this more generic things to connect the pieces. Okay.
Well, the most generic thing is a URL, right?
Yeah,
As
I
a
think
target.
actually, yeah, the idea of the location is that it is a URI, right? If it's something that's probably like you could have that, or you could have, like.
Yeah, and then you have utility libraries or whatever that will deal with handling
Okay.
HTTPS or file, or it depends on the system, the location. Yeah.
Yeah, that works for me. Yeah, exactly. If this is also like doing that, then that's perfect.
So here, base, here, base, data says here, configuration URI of a file of the data, the URL of the thing to load.
You would be able to convert remote stuff into local stuff if you need to.
If you needed to, right? Yeah. Yeah, actually, I feel like a translator would be a task, and not because like I feel like you would want a SEDML loader and then a different. Oh, maybe not. No, I don't
Well,
know.
you could definitely like load a SELML model, then a separate that would output a SELML model, right? It would take in a file, output a
Yeah,
SELML model, and
it
then
might
you'd want
be
to translate it. So it's a separate task. The input
right,
of this would be a SELML model, and the output would be an SBML model. So they would link up.
right. But I'm imagining like I don't know, like you when you go to get to your implementation stage, an SBML loader might be like, I'm just going to throw the thing at Roadrunner, and I'm going to start passing around the Roadrunner object. And then if all I wanted to do was to export that to translate it to something else, then I have this sort of I've done this extra work to load it into Roadrunner, and I didn't need that. All I needed was to like aim the translator at the file. But it would certainly be possible to like you do need a translator as a task also because you could simulate and then convert to SELML and then simulate some more. I don't know. Logan, you're behind up.
This may be coming full circle, but if we're just having everything in inputs be tasks, then it should be in tasks. But if the goal is to list things that are, effective inputs to the SEDML, then it should just be the resources themselves that are declared. It shouldn't be a task itself. If you're going to load a SBML model, just say that there's going to be an SBML model and then have there be a task that says to load that. Especially if we're going with specific like SELML to SBML translators, like list the resources as inputs or don't list inputs at all and just have it all be tasks.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So then you have so you don't have your loader here until you get to something that actually like takes takes that thing as input.
What? So under inputs, it would just be experiment.
Basically just be locations and maybe types, which is
It would
sort
be
of what I had. Go ahead.
it would be like it wouldn't be a location though, because it would just be like probably would be like example one mapped to the URI, and then
That's like model one maps to this.
yeah, directly, and then later on we would reference model one later.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know. Might be easier for readability, but this should be for the tools. So I don't know.
I mean, someone's going to need to load it, but so yeah, like that would be a different. You would have like under your data, you would have like this is an experimental data.csv and it's this, and then somewhere else you have a loader that says like it's column based. There's a separator. Here's the column names, whatever. You're wrong.
If we're going for minimal required information, then I think the list of just a list of tasks should.
Yeah, or just make these tasks. Go ahead and make them tasks, and like if we do a little bit of extra work, that's okay. Like who cares?
Yes, I think the outputs could also be tasks.
The outputs are tasks. Yeah, I mean the outputs are basically tasks. I'm not entirely sure if it makes sense for outputs to just be tasks Because you do want, like in SED, like there's definitely an idea of like, now I'm handing off this stuff to you. And it's not just the dangling things that no one ever used as input. Because something may have produced 5 things as output and then you used one of them. And then the rest are dangling. Like, do I need to output them somewhere? Like, no, like I have a list of the things I want to actually output.
I could also see the case where you have one thing that is output and then it's input to something else, but we still want it.
And you still want that as output itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But you would just collect the stuff. You would have like an combine archive writer, and there you would put in all the outputs you want. You select the ones, and and that's like what you're interested in. So at some point, you have to define a task which is collecting only the outputs you're interested in. If you're not interested in everything which is dangling, so you would have a
Well,
like,
yeah, and that is these outputs, right?
But
but why
it's the
not just make
opposite
that
of
you could just make it a task and I mean I
They
like that a
are.
lot.
They're just a particular kind of task. They're an output task. I
but
mean,
it's a
if you want them,
serialization task, right?
if you want them to hide in the task list, that's fine. It's just, I think it might be kind of nice to pull them out.
It's
Okay.
the
In their own
inverse of
list.
loading, right? It's
Yeah.
Say
you
that
got
again?
loading tasks and it's the
How-
inverse of loading. You got
how-
loading tasks and you got serialization tasks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is fine. So in one way, that top level key, the inputs, tasks, and outputs, they're for the readers, they're organizational. They don't
Right.
really matter, but I see that there is certain utility. I mean, we might also want to add more things in there, but essentially
yeah.
we kind of in reading this file, we have to go to however far down we have to go down the JSON, find all the tasks, find their inputs and outputs, connect them, and run that. I think well, I'd be in support of keeping the outputs, tasks, inputs as kind of this optional, nice organizational thing. If
Right.
it was all under the same, if it was all under the tasks, I think it would do the same thing.
I would
Yeah, I agree.
I would put them under the task and that we say they have to be sorted from inputs to outputs because we have the graph in the end. And if you serialize them and write them out, you have to sort them from inputs to outputs because then it's easier for people to figure out inputs are listed on top of this list, task list, and the outputs down there. And then
Yeah, okay. My mind is changing back and forth. But so what if we have it categorized under outputs, but we make it wrong and like it's actually non-output? You know, like so there's certain arbitrariness here that if we just had a list of tasks
wait,
done.
yeah,
So I
exactly.
think there would be certain classes of tasks, basically. There are classes of tasks that go in your output section, and there are classes of tasks that go in your input section, and there are classes of tasks that go into your task section.
I just want why I really like this list of tasks is if you like then add something which is like create like it's not an input anymore, but you added something on top which now creates the input. You have to like everywhere in the code you have to take care of that it is removed from the input list and the new thing is written in the input list. Same with the output. If you connect something afterwards, you suddenly have to put the things out of the output list and put the new thing in the output list. And so there's a lot of code and management.
I don't know if that's like as written, the output tasks can't be connected to anything else right now. I don't think.
Exactly, but in my workflow, I'm modeling a system,
maybe.
and now I'm like, okay, I have my data, and now I would do like I don't care about this data anymore, but I want to do like an additional analysis on top of that, and so it shouldn't be an output anymore. But my new thing, which I did afterwards, is now the output, and so I have to remove it from the output list and write the new thing in the output list and so on, instead of just saying I want to have this task and connect it and I'm done. You know, it's just
So, like,
overhead while you're modeling and connecting the pieces.
So you're imagining something like you originally had inputs models model 1, and then you would say like, actually, I want to pre-process model 1.
Exactly. Now I
So
want
you have
parameter.
model 3, and then you have a processor to make model 1, and now suddenly it's not in inputs models, it's in tasks. It's in tasks, right?
Exactly.
So that's what you're saying. Like you wouldn't have to change this ID if this is
I don't have to
always
move it
just
in the list.
tasks model 1.
Exactly. For instance, if I have a CSV, I want to have as an input, and now I'm not using this CSV, but I have another task which generates this CSV, and so I have to remove the CSV loader and all the stuff from the input list and put the other thing in the
Right.
input list. You know. And then this is doing the modeling. Of course, if I have one static version which I want to send around, this is all fine. But if I model and connect new pieces and so on, man, this just creates a lot of overhead. And you like even if you want to change it manually, like you're in this YAML or JSON file, you're like, oh man, now I it's in this list. I have to put it in that list. Whatever.
I'm
Yeah.
completely following what he said is exactly what will happen. I mean, so like if what is the list of tasks wrong? Because if we can do it with something simple, then we should just
Yeah.
keep it simple. Like if it is a list of tasks, let's just have it be a list of tasks.
And
Uh,
and software can really easy. We have a library which just said, hey, report me my list of inputs, report me my list of outputs from the graph. So we can get this information super easy from the task list and the connectors. And so the software can us provide this list. We don't have to write them ourselves. Yeah.
All right. I can buy that. Logan?
Generally, I mean, what Matthias and Aran is saying makes perfect sense. There's only one thing in my mind that would make me say we still want some form of inputs, outputs, and that's a matter of quick parsing. If you get a SEDML file, if you want to figure out whether or not you can do it in this format, you're going to have to build the entire network, get all the types, get all the connections, wire it all, and then and only then can you evaluate whether or not you can do inputs and outputs. Instead, if you still have your resources as inputs and outputs, all you have to do is take the types of every single task, check the resources. If you can do all of that, you're done. You don't need to build any networks because the types themselves are defined in the registry of what they will do. So you can either check if you do the task, and if you can't do the task, you're done. If you can't load that resource, like if you don't know what that resource is, you're done. That would be the only reason to keep an inputs and outputs section. And if that
I
isn't
could
important,
see,
then ditch it.
I mean, I can imagine pushing that to being a tools issue or a infrastructure issue, like the library, just say like, get me inputs, and it gets you the list of things that you're inputting and their types.
Yeah.
Because the library should be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
it's
I
a
think what
tautological
Logan is
word.
trying to say is to be able to fail early.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and again, I think if we provide programmatic support for people that want to fail early and that sort of thing, I think that could help resolve that sort of issue.
Yeah. But for me, this is all tooling. I would see two different versions of this file. There's basically this dirty version that you use during modeling, and you put a lot of things in, and you have 20 tasks you used before, and you now don't use them anymore, and they're still in your list and so on. And then you say, now I want to execute that. And in this execution process, you would generate like a second file, which is cleaned up. It removes all tasks which you don't use, like and so on. And it provides you the list of inputs and outputs and so on. And this whole resolving the graph, it's not computationally expensive. You can do this in a reasonable, like in
Yeah.
below seconds. So it's not like we have like 5 million things in a super big graph, and you can cache a lot of this resolving also. So I would say like you have this dirty version, and then you do something where you get the inputs and outputs and have a cleaned up task list, and this is what really goes to the execute in the end.
Yeah. All right.
The simplicity is very compelling. Also the underscore type being a reference to the registry. I think it's a very clear thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's going to be a tooling requirement there already. Just to check the registry, make sure it's connecting.
So we have our base type for everything is the task. And then we could like call them input tasks. And then output tasks.
Yeah, or like load we cut. Yeah, I think that's fine. But loading tasks and what did you call it, Matthias? A collector task.
And then And then we have, I don't know. And like, these are, and then inputs, outputs, and simulations and everything else just becomes like what is useful to group together, because all input tasks are going to have a location. So you have a base class that's an input location, and then the subtasks define what that is or something. Yeah, it's just an organizational thing.
Yeah. For me, one really open thing is how this model object should look like and how this data object should look like. So what metadata do we need on that, and what additional information that we can pass it around. Like, so for instance, for the model, I could see like all the different model loaders, they generate a model, and there should be certain things that we have on that. I would say one thing is like something like selections, like the subset of things that we want. If we simulate the stuff, it should be in the numerical values which are generated out of that. So there has to be a list of selectors, and we have to have a task which can modify the selectors. So that for me what I hope.
You want to attach the selectors to the model?
Yes.
I was imagining you come up with a selectors list for every task that needs a selector list. Like I would tend to put the selector list in the uniform time course, because that's going to be, I could use the same model and run a uniform time course and run a steady state. And when I'm running a uniform time course, I want time. When I'm running a steady state, I don't want time.
Yeah,
or like, and I might want a completely different selectors also.
Yeah, but I think you have to think about it like everything that we would like to reuse somewhere else, you have to put it out of the task. And you want a selector for time course simulation. You want a selector for a steady state thing. You want a set selectors for a sensitivity analysis, for a parameter scan. And so you want to be able to modify the selectors depending on the analysis. Because for a time course, you want probably all the trajectories. For sensitivity analysis, you only want like one curve. And so there has to be the model. It has the selectors in there, and then you would have a selector change task where you can set the selectors, and then before you run a time course, you set the selectors for that. Before you run a steady state, you can set the selectors on the model, and the selector thing would just take a model and change the selectors and gives you out a model. You don't have to put this in the time course.
Do that in the time course or the sensitivity or whatever task? I mean, you just put it there.
No, it's just a task. The set selectors would be just a task which takes a model and puts out another model which has different selectors. But the selectors should be part of the model object.
I don't think they should be part of the model object. I disagree. I think they should be part of the this task object. But one of the inputs to the uniform time course should be the output variables, selectors. I mean, it could be done the other way. I feel like that would make it more awkward, like having a bunch of converter, like, I don't know. I feel like a model is just like a model and with all the IDs, and then each given task say like, these are the ones I want for this particular task. Unless, I don't know. I mean, like, if you do want to like save a particular list of output variables that you're going to do somewhere else, we could have something that is just defined data.
I'm not sure I understand. So the model, the output variables are going to be like kind of like a streaming the state, right?
It is a subset of the elements of the model that you want to record.
Yeah, but specifically, it's going to be the state associated with those, or the time series coming out of
in a uniform time course, yes, but not in a steady state thing. In the steady state, it's just the final states, right? Just those numbers.
I see.
You could consider it, as channels. When are you collecting information? Like in a way, for steady state, you collect after the task is run, but and the time course during. But you could also imagine time course where you collect it after, and maybe making that distinction of output channels would be helpful.
Like the other thing I'm thinking about this is like you might have output variables for a time course, but then the model itself like still knows what parameter P5 is. And you might want that as used as input somewhere else, or you might want the whole model as input somewhere else. I feel like the selectors are something that are tasks, are like this kind of task specific. Anyway,
that sounds right to me. Like it's that task that's responsible for taking the model output, selecting the appropriate piece, and outputting it.
Yeah,
it seems
Okay.
correct to me.
I can live with that, but then the model needs at least like this list of complete complete selectors or something like this, everything I could select on the model, you know, because somewhere we have to validate like the things that we request. Can we do that, or I don't know.
I see.
okay. So do you want as a validation step in your SBML loader a list of all the IDs I will ever reference and make sure that they exist in there, basically?
I think
Yeah.
what's funny here, maybe, let's see if I got this right. So the model is going to come in from the model loading tasks above, right? It's
Right.
that thing, what was it, the SBML file? Yeah. It's in whatever example.xml. Nothing here is telling us what variables are in example.xml. It's internal to
Right.
that file. And yet we here we're kind of breaking that separation when we go down to the other task. And okay.
The model loader has to provide that everything which is there. That's what I'm saying, and that's also like the main solution for you now. Like if you do it like you say, you write it on the time cost thing, you always have to provide the selectors. So you could never take a model and just run a simulation on it and it creates all the outputs. Like or you have to define, okay, if we don't provide any selectors, then it does all the selectors. But somewhere we need this list of names which are all the selectors, and these we have to store on the model. So this all references. And if you store already the all references on the model, then we can also store the selected ones on the model, because it makes it much easier, because not in every task that needs this, we have to put it as an input and pass it around and so on. That's we want to reduce the input.
I don't know, like you want like default selectors or something?
Yeah, basically all selectors. So a model has to say, okay, what can I report data on? And that's the max. Like if we create a data matrix out of that by running a simulation, it would create like for all these IDs some data. But then we need also like a subset and say like selected ones or something like this. This is which is currently active. And so I have a model object, and then I can change this currently active things and put this model object with the selections in some task, in a uniform time course or steady state and so on.
I mean, it's definitely true, and I've been wondering how to do this in this format, to say like give me like all floating species and all variable parameters, right? Like I don't necessarily like, it would be nice to not have to list them anywhere and to just have something that was a keyword to like.
Exactly, and then you could have a selector task.
That sounds like a here.
Yeah, and then you could have a selector task. Exactly, you could have a selector task, and the selector task would be selector all species, and then it just modifies the selected things on the object. You know, because I'm also doing this a lot like that. Or you could have like generic selectors and so on, or like an all selector or whatever, and that would just change your instance of the model selections, and then you can use it everywhere. Instead of, then you also don't have to write out things all the time on every task where you use the model.
So there's task selector as well, like if you want to have the runtime of a task or something like that.
Here, and then like types. Species, and then this has to mean something to someone.
What does that mean to someone?
Right, exactly. Like there are going to be formats that these things make sense. And maybe it has to be choose SBML selectors.
We'd want to point this to the model that was loaded above, right?
Oh, right here. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Model is tasks.
I don't understand. We have to write the inputs and the outputs of every task, or so like for instance, I understand this is a what is a get species task or what? And as in or is this a selector task or what is it right now this?
Yeah, this is a selector task. Choose SEDML selectors specifically because we're doing like floating species and variables.
Yeah. Okay, but then I would say you have to write um
Do you want like model to be under an inputs?
somehow
It could be kind
Yeah,
of
that's like, do you like I'm sort of like I haven't put all my inputs in an input section because everything could be an input, right? It's just the model. And in fact, I think every attribute is some sort of input. Like I just wrote 0 here, but I could load that from a file. I could be like it could be I don't know like in this I could
Are
grab
you
that.
using the string with the hash that like anything can be reachable so long as you use that representation?
Yes, yeah, that's my idea. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, but I
Okay,
would
so
really like
that
if we I would
Go
really
ahead.
like if we could write the inputs and the outputs of every task. So you're right that every parameter that you wrote there, it's an input somehow, but
Yeah.
that has to be an input section or somewhere we have to at least write what is the output of this task and or like the outputs of the task and the output here would be a model again. So one input would be
Yeah, well, again, just like a uniform time course, like you look it up in the registry what the outputs are. You choose SBML
okay.
selectors, you look up in the registry and it's a vector, and you're like, oh, I'm getting a vector of IDs.
Okay,
That's
okay, I understand that. Okay, but we have to write it down now for us because we don't have the registry. Like,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. Well, that's why I put like in the notes, right? Outputs of vector of IDs.
But
So
then
yeah,
then you need
would
a
you
task that's going to apply that vector to something, right?
right.
Or are
And
you
then
just
you
saying you would
have
replace your output variables with that ID instead?
okay, so here we have we're gonna right? So we have model 1 plotting variables. And now I go to my uniform time course and my output variables are now tasks, whatever that was, model 1 plotting variables. And now I delete that instead, right? I can't. Can I comment these? No.
Jason has no comments. Yammer has.
Yeah, I can't put them in. I can't put comments in this, but Logan, you have your hand up.
I'm just wondering if there might be a better way to represent this that takes half the amount of writing. Because effectively what it is there's a model and then we only want a subset of the model in terms of computation. So if we have a task that's quote unquote selecting, why not just say its output is a view? And then the view is the input to the simulation. Like the view knows it's referencing a model, and then you don't need to specify the output variables. The view itself is the output variables you want. That's the whole reason you selected it. So just kill two birds with one stone. The model is the view if you want a subset. And if you want the whole dang thing
Well,
with all the
that's exactly what Matthias was saying earlier. Like the model, he was saying that like the model should come with a particular set of selectors.
Exactly, that you can generate these views also. That will make it much easier. What I meant, you have to pass much less stuff around and define it. Everything which you don't have need as input and outputs, it's better because we have to connect less things in the whole thing.
And also, like if you make an edit to the model, then you only have to look at the model, not every single other task that could possibly absorb the model. The model itself is choosing what it represents to everything else. Like if you have to put the selector on a simulation, you then have to go to every simulation to see the selectors if you change the model. Whereas if you just change the model, You look at the model or the view or whatever I refer to it as, and you just change it there. It's one place to change versus n places.
That's a super good point. If I just change the IDs of my model, I'm not going through this whole thing to change the IDs in everything. I just want to have
Yeah.
this at one point, yeah.
It would be nice that
Well,
like here we're kind of bridging this separation where we're taking models things and I agree that's sloppy. Also,
okay.
if we want to reuse the same workflow for a different model entirely, uh, we'd have to rewrite the entire file rather than just change the file name, right? We could just change it to example2.xml. That would be quite elegant way to reuse a pipe workflow if we have it
But
defined here.
I mean, choosing the state variables or whatever is one thing, right? But you often are changing parameters as well. So how, I mean, it's easy if all you want to do is say run a simulation with this model, and I want a way to select all my species or all my, all of my things and just do something with them. But when you want to do specific things, you still need to be able to do it, right?
Yeah.
But that's all task. Like it's a model change task, basically a set parameter task, and then you have a model view, and you just apply this changes, and then you have a new model, and this model you run through the rest. But you don't have to change the rest of the workflow. You would just add like basically a step in between somewhere where you change the parameters, and then this would be a very local change, and the rest of the workflow still works.
I'd like to suggest that this is, I don't know if it's an infrastructure problem, but it's a module availability problem. We could have generic modules that are designed to be so reusable very generically, or we could have modules that are like, okay, we know what we're setting ourselves up for here. There's going to be a specific parameter loading module, and so this workflow is going to be for a specific parameter. I think we're going to have to build up our process registry. It's been a nice exercise to focus on this and say it goes to the process registry. We're also making a lot of decisions here about a few specific tasks that we want available.
Yeah.
But I think it's gonna start to become really pertinent that we make sure that that side of the equation also has support. When we look up SBML loader, we're going to need to make sure that there is something in the process registry that can do that.
I think the issue that elements that you select here could have different data streams. Like a species could have a rate, it could have a concentration, could have an amount, and just
Also true,
putting
yeah.
them like this, I don't know. I mean, it's not sufficient.
It could be the model language would have to decide. So yeah, Matthias, you brought this up also. Like, what is if in the model S1 is an amount and S2 is a concentration? Does this mean that if I just say S1, is it the amount, and if I just say S2, is it the concentration?
Yeah,
Or do we do like Roadrunner, which is like if it's just S1, it is always the amount, and if I want concentration, I have to put brackets around it. So then I'm sort of defining the syntax of these strings.
Exactly. That has to be the part of the documentation of this SBML loader. So what is the exact string syntax for accessing all these different things that we can do in SBML, particle numbers and so on? And what we have to think it up and write it up, but then everybody knows later on if they encounter this kind of string in the selector, it means that and that for the model variables.
We need
Same
very
thing for like
good.
local variables. J0.k1 or something. Go ahead.
We need very good documentation
Yes.
that we can have alongside this. So, like we look up SBML loader and it's like, this is how you do it. Again, like building up the process registry in a way that doesn't get in our way later on. I think it's like some standard documentation, for every.
Well, and the other thing is just a good number of tests, right? Just put a bunch of tests in there that would like use S1 and bracket S2 and make sure that the outputs are correct. And
Yeah,
then,
but that becomes much easier because all the tasks are pretty small. And so we can have a lot like of unit tests on the task, even let AI
yeah.
write a lot of this stuff. And so the smaller the pieces are, the easier it is to get to test them comprehensively. And
So Matthias, like if you, I'm going, so if we have a selector task that is like, give me my, give me my variables, give me my variable species and my variable things. That seems to take as input a model. And I was hoping to be able to put in the model object itself just a list of selectors. But then I can't do that if I want to generate them by handing it a model. So maybe no, okay. What if I had things like I could define selectors here, and then in my wherever my generate the thing is. Did it disappear? There, okay. Okay. Selector ID is time course selectors.
So the tasks one.
And then this is okay. Add, and then this is add selector to model. And now my model one comes as an input, and the output is a new 1B or something. I don't know.
yeah, exactly.
And now model 1B has a new selector in it called time course selectors.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly how this should work.
Logan, you have your hand up. I don't know if it's still up or.
Yeah, sorry. For this specific kind of case, I would imagine instead of a separate model and selector ID, you would reference the selectors relative to the model. But I guess if you're trying to separate it in terms of the selectors were made separately, then sure, this makes sense. Uh, there is something worth asking for the question of like, how would I select all species, all reactions, that kind of thing. And it's something that hasn't really been brought up in terms of how we could do it. If we're having these, tasks and they reference the registry in terms of what they do, you can have the equivalent of static variables effectively. So in the model definition where the model loader is, you could have the selectors be there, and then the selectors be, SPMO loader : species. And that seems reasonable to me that if you're going to have something that knows the load and SBML model, it would know what species are for SBML. And so having certain ideas, attributes, values, etc., correlated with a type seems reasonable to me. And then you can again have the selectors attached to the model without needing to specify an entire task to just apply a set of selectors.
Yeah, I could see that. Basically, I have like species. And then it's like, but then this is a function, right?
Well, it's a property, so you wouldn't it wouldn't even be a list. It would just be a string saying SBML loader and then referencing the concept. The idea of a list is you're listing it out, whereas if it's a string compared to the other selectors, it's a property.
But I don't think this is so important right now. For me, it's similar like with the TSV loader. It's more like, okay, there can be a lot of optional settings which can provide a lot of different use cases. And it's similar here, like with this SPML selector or whatever. Like if people have like very special use cases of subsets of strings they want, they can provide like some options and implement this sub functionality on that. And yeah, the general thing is like that we have something which changes the selections. That's the important part. And okay, how we do it and which subsets and so on, this can be like then the specific of the implementation of that thing. If this makes sense. It's
I think yeah, I think we made a lot of progress on this document and agreeing here. There's gonna be the process registry and how that's developed and how new modules are put in there. And you know, I think that there's many valid ways to do things, and we just so long as they report the inputs and the outputs, you know, there's a few certain things that we have to agree on, the
Right.
inputs, the outputs, and then people could develop their own SBML loader with their own features, and we'll see how well they do.
That's
But
yeah, that's definitely the way to do things. Yeah.
what
Should
for
we
me,
start a loader competition?
yeah, exactly.
yeah, for me the main thing missing to start getting this implemented is that we have to define how is our abstract task looking. Like basically the task, how is the task class looking? Because we only have like instances of the task here, but somewhere we should write down, okay, how is the abstract task looking? And also how is this abstract data object looking, which is wrapping the actual data? So these two things, if we would write down the fields they should have, then one could do like a prototype implementation and try to put pieces together. You know.
Thus
I think
far, the
the
only thing
task.
we've ever used as our base class of task is just the type attribute, right? Everything else has been different. I think it might be nice to put a Casal thing on the base task also.
I think he was asking about like the actual class, the abstract class. So I think if we have a class that is the task type, it needs
Yeah.
it needs an input, it needs to declare the inputs, it needs to declare its outputs. And so
Well,
any specific task is gonna provide its own specific inputs and outputs. Okay, it needs to
but that's not a field on the task object, is it? It is just the idea that it should provide some inputs and know what the outputs are. We don't, and like we could do that as actual fields on the object, but I didn't think that we were going to go that direction.
I would like to have this as actual fields and then or like as lists or something, and then the task is really writing this lists. Right now we have it as attributes, or that would make it. I don't know. Or it would make
So
it
what
clear
you
that
were
the
saying,
task.
you would actually want this sim1 to have and like
Yeah. Now I want
all the inputs, and
or like
then a
just
list of everything that comes down below, right? And anything that
no.
was here.
but
No,
but that's gonna come from the uniform time course registry, right?
that's what I was thinking. I didn't think we wanted an actual
No,
field.
I think we're talking. I was talking about the registry. Like so when you look up uniform time course, what does it say there?
Okay.
And
Yes.
I think I don't think it belong that all inputs belongs here. I think it belongs there. I'm not sure if Matthias, if that was
Is
correct.
Okay.
that
Okay. But then okay. Perhaps we could write the task like what you did right now, and then could write the abstract uniform time course. And then the concrete instantiation of these things that they have their three levels. Like how's the general task looking? How would the task for the uniform time course look in the registry? And now the last one is here the concrete instantiation that we have that we see at least once the three levels that we have.
Right.
Yeah. So for the next demo, we really need our SED description, which is this file, and we need our registry file, which would be like here are the tasks and their inputs and their outputs, and so and we'd have to kind of put
But
those side
we
by
just need a
side.
way, so we need a way to like formally define things in a registry that are not going to go into a SED2 document per se. But it will, so, I mean, in a sense, it's what this was, right? Like this is sort of what I was thinking of when I was writing these things, like a task has these outputs.
Yes.
Where's my uniform time course, right? I think I put it down here. Yeah, like this is my definition of the output type is a thing.
Yeah, I think we can do it without English. I think we can do it with kind of a type definition, but yeah, essentially this is it. Like
This sort of thing, right? Yeah.
yep,
These are the required inputs. These are the optional outputs. These are the validation rules. This is like I'm just writing in text here a matrix of doubles, but there's a more formal way of saying a matrix of doubles or a dictionary of doubles or whatever. Yeah. So this sort of thing is what we're imagining would be in the registry or in the spec or whatever or both.
100%.
Okay.
And probably for the next session, which we'll schedule, we should kind of look at an example registry and an example spec, and we can, we read the inputs from, we should at least do it in a simple case with our minds
Okay.
before we automate it.
Yeah. Love it.
So then, just to be very clear, the next goal is sort of to start making alluding to last time, the packages, if you will. Like we have the idea of like the format of the document having a series of tasks. We know that tasks only have inputs and outputs. So now we actually need to start enumerating, you know, for simulating uniform time course, what's a uniform time course? We're going to need outputs. We're going to need to actually formalize that somewhere so that we have some sort of reference of inputs and outputs that one can then make an implementation off of.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically just writing the spec. Like traditionally we would write it in English and have UML diagrams. We can put it in JSON schemas or whatever form we want, but
Sure. It was the idea though of making sort of like a market of different options, right? So rather than having SED2 define a limited set, we would release it in a set of packages and a set of like different subcategories of things, and that way it was more discretized. So I guess
yeah.
subspecs, if you will, rather than a grand
Yeah.
SED2 spec.
Yeah, what I would really like is just a collection of files where every file is describing one task, so that we don't have like this big spec, but we have just a uniform time course file, and it just describes the uniform time course inputs, outputs, so that we have like this really small modular things where every piece is can be
You want to break up the spec into individual.
exactly in the tasks that we and yeah.
So one generic document that just says these are the sorts of things you will find in these files, and then the files themselves.
I mean,
Exactly.
we might even want like a folder called, registry, process registry, which has just like all the files in there, right? And so you could read
Yeah.
possibly even titled by the type. So it'd be like
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking
uniform
about.
time course dot JSON. You'd read it. It would be inputs, outputs, whatever else, default, whatever else we need. And we'd have another file in there. That could easily be made into a database that we could, put up online, query or download local. I think that'd be a very nice, like framework. Probably we even need just a new repository on GitHub that's just like said to registry, and it's just like a bunch of files.
Exactly. That's what I think about. Because and then people can go there and say, hey, I just tried to implement the model loader and the uniform time code, like two pieces, and you don't have to read like this 5,000 lines of code. You just take the two pieces you want to connect now, put them out, and try if you can get an implementation of that or a prototype. Yeah.
Well, we are at our time. That was really interesting. Hopefully, it's not just the four of us. Right. And if we can make it compelling enough, hopefully it'll be like interesting for other people as well. But yes.
What I see is like we can get pretty quick everything which we can do in SEDML level 1 version 5, and much more implementations and it's not too much work to get what people currently do with SEDML level 1. Like, or what is in biomodels and so on, and like all the SEDML files which are in the wild, we can do pretty easily, like in not too much work. And then we have something which is okay. It's new, it's much more powerful, much more granular, and we can do everything that we did with the version 1. And then hopefully it takes off from there. That's my thing. And for me, it's the big thing is I can see I would use that immediately in my own workflows or like how I model things. So that's for me because I see that I can do everything that I want to do, and it has it solves a lot of issues I have, and it also solves problems and removes bugs in my workflows. Because if I'm sure these pieces all work nicely and I just have to connect them, I don't have to worry about them ever again. If I always have to re-implement pieces, I always do new bugs and so on. So that for me, super interesting to have that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I will try to, I don't know, I think this, I might try to put the recording on the center YouTube site. So,
And
All right.
we'll follow up again soon.
following up. Yeah. All right.
Thank
See ya.
you. See ya.
Bye.